Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Novel Strip Show. I decided to start this channel to talk about novels, hopefully novel and interesting facts about them, and also about comics or comic strips. Just kind of my opinions about them. Not really, I don't have a set plan at the moment. Maybe just kind of reviews, general chats. And what I thought I'd do to kick off is go back in time to January 2017, which is when I started the 50 book challenge. And I think I'll kind of work my way through to this year. I've been reading a lot less this year, which is why I'm not just starting from now. But also, I think it might be quite interesting to see how my opinion of these books may have changed after I've had almost a year and a half to reflect on them. And now that I've read a lot more in that time as well, if I still rate them the same. So we'll crack on. First book that I read in 2017 was The Great Gatsby. I remember really liking the start. I decided I was going to have a 1920s themed cocktail party, get a gramophone. I was really into the idea. By the end, I strongly disliked the book. I don't know exactly when it was. It was around the middle. I honestly can't remember where it was now, but I just started to lose interest. Nothing about the book interested me anymore. The turn of events at the end, people die. I won't say who, because I don't like spoilers. But I just couldn't care less when they did. So yeah, that was quite disappointing because I do remember really liking it at the start. It's a well-regarded classic. I'm normally a big fan of classics, but this just wasn't for me. So I rated it. I think initially I maybe rated it 3 stars. Currently on Goodreads, it's just 2 stars, and I think that's. I can't remember when I changed it, but I think that's probably fair. I wouldn't really recommend it to anyone, but it wasn't the worst thing I've ever read. Just wasn't for me. So that's that. Next up, we have Orlando by Virginia Woolf. This was actually a present from a very good friend of mine when I said I want to do the book challenge, and she's a massive reader. I was like, yeah, have you got any book recommendations? And she actually bought this for me when she came up from London to visit me here in Scotland. It was okay. It I find Virginia Woolf's writing style very difficult. It's definitely not something you can pick up and read quickly. Half the time I didn't know what on earth she was talking about. It's the language is pretty complex, to be honest, and it's not something you can just read through. It's definitely not a story. It's definitely something you have to think about, and yeah, I mean, it's definitely skillfully written. I think the concept of Orlando, for those of you who don't know, the basic concept is Orlando is a writer, start out as male in. God, it's been that long. In the 16th century, and moves throughout time, changes into a woman. And ends up as a woman at in the 20s, is it? Yeah, modern female writer in the 1920s. So it's a very interesting concept. Obviously with the Bloomsbury movement, or Bloomsbury group rather, that Woolf was part of. Very important in literature. But it just again it was I can appreciate it for its merit. I don't know that I'd be in a rush to read it again or in a rush to read anything else by Virginia Woolf. But yeah, I did enjoy it. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. On Goodreads, I think I'd stick that. Perhaps a bit less, perhaps 2.75. Because it's just not to my personal taste that much. Next up, this is a collection of The Plague, The Fall, The Exile, and some essays by Exile in the Kingdom by Camus. I studied French and Spanish at uni. I was meant to read this as part of my French degree. There is a possibility that I did not, but that's when I bought it anyway. I was also meant to read it in French. Obviously, I bought the translation and didn't even read that. So I decided I would get back to it. I absolutely loved the Professor Hyde. She was so passionate about Camus, and yeah, she really inspired me to kind of go back to it. And I did, and I quite enjoyed it. It's basically about this town that becomes exiled because these rats keep dying, and it turns out that they find all these dead rats in the street because they've died of the plague, and then different people keep catching the plague. It's definitely interesting. It's quite philosophical. It's very interesting to think about, who survives, who doesn't survive, and the sort of what would happen nowadays. I guess is when I was reading it is what I thought if suddenly you were boxed in, you weren't allowed to leave your town, no one was allowed to leave. You weren't allowed to see your family who might be in other towns, especially during the time period. You couldn't just Skype them or anything. Um, and even delivering post and things like that isn't really possible because the town's completely shut off. You can't get people in to get mail out, etc. So yeah, pretty interesting. I gave it 3 stars, and I think that's maybe even a little bit harsh. I It's definitely another one where you have to think a lot, and you can't really just read it for the story, but certainly a lot more so than Virginia Woolf. So I think maybe even 3.5 stars I would give it there. And I'm definitely eager to read more by Camus. So I think it definitely deserves a higher rating than Orlando because I'm not really in any rush to read anything else by Virginia Woolf, but I certainly am with Camus, and I definitely enjoyed it, even if it wasn't my favourite. Next up, I read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I haven't read Weir of Hermiston yet. But yeah, I just read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This was from the same friend who bought me Orlando, and I very much preferred this. I actually read it when I was in school, but I think I was 15 at the eldest when I read it. And yeah, I loved going back and reading it again. Again, language a bit complex. It's certainly, not the most up to date. And for the length of it is very very short. Took me slightly longer than it would have done. But yeah, it is a classic for a reason. It's incredible when you look at the nature of good and evil throughout it, and how Jekyll copes with it. The When he turns into Hyde, Hyde's almost childlike, and for me, I love how it made me question sort of our nature. Are we born good? Are we born evil? What is the true nature of good and evil? We have all these, kind of. Do we have all these animalistic urges within us that we repress, etc.? So yeah, it's a great tale. It's a classic, obviously been adapted 101 times. But yeah, going back to the original, I really really enjoyed. So I gave that 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and I'd probably still rate it the same now, to be honest. The final book then that I read in January 17 was this. This was Mr. Pip, and I believe it was when I went to uni. I got this free, and I didn't read it throughout uni. I think everyone else I know who got it at uni gave it to a charity shop or something. I kept my copy, and I'm very very glad I did. I really really enjoyed this. It's all about a protagonist who she grows up on an island, and there's only one white man on the island. He teaches the kids English and reads them Great Expectations, and she completely falls in love with it. At the end, she comes to England and does a PhD all about Dickens because she was so touched by the story of Great Expectations. It's quite moving, and to be honest, I loved how it replicated for me just the effect that literature can have on you, but also people can have on you, teachers can have on you. There's obviously the issue of how he's treated as the only white man on the island as well. That's quite interesting. And yeah, overall, I think it was a really good read. There's one particularly emotional bit that I wasn't expecting. Also, I really like the cover design, but I also subsequently read Great Expectations, and much like the character in Mr. Pip, it then became my favourite book, I think, of all time. And yeah, I'd be interested. I'd probably give it a few more years, to be honest, but I would very much like to read Great Expectations again and then go back and read this so I can kind of know exactly what she's talking about, because I had no prior knowledge of Great Expectations when I read Mr. Pip, but I still really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, those were the books that I read in January 17. Hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching.